Está começando o podcast Inteligência Jurídica, canal oficial do Machado Meyer Advogados, que atualiza você com nossa visão sobre as questões que impactam seus negócios.
Welcome, everyone. This is the first episode of the third season of the Energy Transition series of Machado Meyer podcast. It's our pleasure to have all of you here today. So for this episode, we have the pleasure to have with us Sharn Ward from Corio. How are you, Sharn? Welcome to our podcast.
I'm very well, thank you, Karina. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am here with José Prado as well, a partner to the Energy and Infrastructure Practice of Machado Meyer. Hello, Prado.
Hello, Sharn. It's a pleasure to be with you again. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
So just a brief introduction of Sharn. Sharn is Senior Vice President for Corio Generation, working in new markets and America team. She is responsible for new portfolio opportunities, is focused on markets looking for offshore wind industry, including countries such as Brazil, Spain, and Greece. Sharn has led development of the Brazilian portfolio of Corio, as well as the Corio's offshore wind team in Brazil today. So Sharn, starting our discussions today, I'd like to pose you like a general question on offshore wind power and energy transition. In your view, how relevant is the offshore wind power industry today when you think about this energy transition movement worldwide? In other words, how you believe offshore wind power projects could contribute to achieving the net zero greenhouse emissions by 2050 under the Paris Agreement guidelines?
Thank you for the question. In short, very relevant, I guess is my answer. The International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA, as it's often known, has projected that in order to meet the 2050 targets, the net zero 2050 targets, the global installed wind capacity has to rise to over 8,000 gigawatts by 2050, and that projection includes 2,000 gigawatts from offshore wind. We've been quite successful so far in building the industry, and the global offshore wind pipeline has doubled to around 850 gigawatts. That was between 2020 and 2021. But we've still got quite a long way to go to try and work towards that 2050 target. And in 2022, we saw current installed global offshore wind capacity hit 64.3 gigawatts. The wind industry is responding well, though, to the demand to continue to expand, and we see that offshore wind will make a real material contribution to the targets that the industry is trying to achieve. Total global wind capacity installed so far is helping to avoid over 1.2 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually. That's equivalent to the annual emissions of South America, which is a huge contribution already to the net zero target. The International Renewable Energy Agency estimates that 3.5 million tons of carbon dioxide, that's based on unabated coal, is avoided per every 1 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity installed, which is more than any other renewable energy is able to contribute. So we have high expectations for offshore wind, and we think it will continue to play a very relevant role in achieving those net zero targets set in the Paris Agreement.
Sure, that is very interesting to hear, and we have very high expectations for that to occur. My second question here is, it's in line with that, because pursuant to certain studies that we have analyzed, and also in accordance with what you just said, this market is very promising. But we know that there's challenges that we will face, including competition with other sources, planning, scarcity of materials, governmental barriers, and so on. So what do you think, in your view, are the potential challenges for the development of this market, and how do you see that we can overcome those challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Prado, for the question. And you're absolutely right. The route to achieving the targets is not without its challenges. And I agree with some of the challenges that you outlined. There's a range of technical obstacles and that could hamper the rollout of offshore wind farm, whether it's availability of grid connections, availability of other third-party infrastructure such as ports, which play a huge role in the delivery and supporting operation of wind farm. We're still seeing local opposition to the build out of the wind industry, and as the industry continues to expand, we're struggling with the development of the supply chain to be able to answer to the project delivery demand. Particularly recently, we're starting to see very high capital costs, or have been seeing very high capital costs. And I think over the next few years, given the global challenges associated with the economic crisis, those will continue to be a real consideration to the industry. And I think what we're experiencing more and more now is a series of challenges associated with outdated regulatory frameworks and shortages of skilled labour, both of which are really important to us being able to achieve the offshore wind development and delivery goals. There are a series of things I think that we can do to address that, starting with well-designed policy frameworks and regulatory processes. And I guess that's one that's particularly important to the stage that Brazil is at the moment. Policy frameworks and streamlined regulatory processes have proven to be essential in making sure that development projects don't experience bottlenecks on their way to achieving authorizations and financial close. And getting those things right really does facilitate the rapid deployment of offshore wind. It's important that governments seek to put in place predictable policy frameworks that can help to avoid strategic development issues and speed up planning processes to help offshore wind farm projects get underway. It's also really essential that grid infrastructure is developed, planned and built within the time frame that can allow those projects to come forward. Large-scale deployment of offshore wind can materially change the system characteristics of the electricity network, and so it's very important that those responsible for the grid network infrastructure, the operation of the electricity network, start to plan in advance how offshore wind can start to be incorporated into the system, and how any issues associated with the system characteristics can be mitigated as the industry evolves. Supply chain is always a really important consideration for offshore wind, and offshore wind actually has a really good history of helping to develop local and international supply chains, manufacturing capabilities, organisations that can contribute to all aspects of development, construction and delivery. Offshore wind developers spend a lot of their time communicating with government representatives from the supply chain, associations who are there to support economic advancement or generation in different countries, in order to share information and lessons learned on how those organisations can be ready to support the industry. And it's important that type of engagement continues, and the supply chain has the confidence to continue to develop and expand in order to support the build-out rates. I think those sorts of themes are being discussed widely across the industry at the moment, and there are several global associations that are working to support initiatives to try and address those challenges. But we certainly have got some way to go to ensure that those mitigation plans are being effective and are ready to support the industry.
Perfect, Sharn. Thank you. Maybe going a little bit further on what you mentioned, some predictive policy frameworks and improvements or advances to the policies and the regulation. We know that today Europe has approximately almost, I would say, 30 gigawatts of offshore wind farms already in operation, right, in different places of Europe, such as France, Norway, United Kingdom, and Spain. In your view, what could be the lessons to be learned from Europe considering their current advanced development stage of offshore wind projects, considering Brazil, considering the fact that today, we have a very incipient industry. We have discussions still taking place in the Congress about the regulatory framework. So in your view, what lessons could be learned from Europe when you think about the Brazil landscape and what is to come in Brazil?
Thank you for the question. And yeah, Europe has had a lot of success in developing and constructing offshore wind farms throughout the last over 20 years now, and it continues to build on its ambitions to deliver more offshore wind capacity. And in fact, in January 2023, the EU member states agreed to install approximately 111 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2030, and that's almost twice its earlier objective of 60 gigawatts, which was set out in the EU offshore renewable energy strategy in 2020. So Europe continues to push the offshore wind agenda and hopes to be a really big participant in the evolution of the industry as it continues. I think one of the things that has already been created and established off the back of the experience to date in Europe is the Global Wind Energy Manifesto that over 100 wind organisations endorsed at COP27. That manifesto sets out a series of kind of common work streams that organisations see as being important to ensure that offshore wind can continue to grow and expand. And I think some of those work streams are going to be quite relevant to Brazil at the moment in the development of the regulatory framework and supporting policies. That they include things like the need to scale up on ambition and to make sure that wind targets are clearly defined and identified in short and long-term energy plans. The need to give confidence to the industry and supply chain and infrastructure investors to move ahead and make investments to renewable energy projects is a really important one. And having those public short and long-term energy plans which speak to the role that offshore wind has to play in the developing energy mix is a really important initiative. One that we continue to push for in Europe and for me in the UK today is the streamlining of permitting schemes. Often offshore wind is a very different type of energy project to those that have come before it. It's present in federal offshore environments as well as state onshore environments, and it often requires a whole series of different permitting activities in order to ensure the broader development is actually authorised and ready to go. And we do see a lot of challenges associated with ensuring that those authorisations all come together in the way that they need to, and that there is alignment across the authorities involved in the decision-making process. So taking a high-level look at the permitting regime that's evolving and trying to ensure that permitting regime is as streamlined as possible so that offshore wind farm projects can pass through the process as efficiently as possible is also a really, really important consideration. I've mentioned grid. I think whenever we talk about the challenges associated with offshore wind, grid gets mentioned over and over again. Energy mixes are changing globally, and as everybody kind of strives for cross-sector decarbonisation and supporting the incorporation of very large, huge commercial scale projects into the energy system. And it's incredibly important that energy systems evolve in a time frame that allows the build out of that type of energy system to take place. So, and I think globally we view that as a really dramatic step up in terms of the level of investment in design, in the evolution of electricity grids across the globe. It's really important as well that countries seek to evolve their energy markets to the future. What we see across Europe is that auction design has started to encourage negative bidding, which is actually particularly unhelpful when it comes to the renewable energy supply chain. It often undermines the viability of that supply chain in its quest to support and replace fossil fuels or other energy technologies which don't have the opportunity to provide as big a contribution to the system as offshore offshore wind. So those areas are going to be a focus, I think, for organisations globally, and I certainly think that they're very relevant considerations for Brazil.
Sure. I was enlightened with your speech. It was very, very good to hear and to know the amount of knowledge that you have in this area. Thanks a lot for sharing that with us. I had one question that was allocated to me, but in fact, I have so many questions that I would like to ask that maybe we need much more time than we have available. But in any case, one of the main questions that I hear from some of our colleagues is that at the end of the day, Brazil has today a lot of hydropower plants and has a vast area to be explored by solar plants as well as by onshore wind projects. So how do you see the competition in relation to all these different sources? That would be my first question. And then second question, as you know, we have been talking about this decree that was issued last January, and it's one of the first main steps in our regulation. How do you see that, and how do you see the transition regime that we should have in place?
Thank you, Prado. And definitely, I think these topics are something that we could continue to discuss for many hours. It's always difficult to try and condense some of the points into a podcast, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to try. In response to your first question, I think there's a place for every technology, and the challenge that we've got ahead of us to really try and push to achieve those net zero goals. Onshore renewable energy is a really established industry here in Brazil, and I think that offshore wind has the potential to complement that very well. As an industry, offshore wind has the ability to introduce new local opportunities to the market here in Brazil. That includes an opportunity to involve new aspects of the supply chain and start to regenerate aspects of the supply chain which perhaps have gone into decline in recent years. Brazil's in a really good position to really take advantage of that as well, given the very large oil and gas industry that exists here and the very many transferable skills associated with the delivery and operation of oil and gas towards the delivery and operation of offshore wind. So I would say that although there are questions at the moment about the role in offshore wind, I would encourage people to see offshore wind as a real complement to the great success that Brazil has had to date in building out a renewable energy industry here in country. And I'd encourage people to start to look at the local opportunities towards supply chain and communities that the industry could bring. To your second question, everybody's very focused at the moment on the development of the regulation, and we've got the federal decree, and we also have a developing bill of law, both of which set out a framework to allow projects to achieve site control, site exclusivity, which is intended to provide confidence to developers to proceed throughout the development process and start to deliver projects to contribute to Brazil's electricity system. I think there's a huge positive momentum at the moment towards trying to reach a regulatory solution, and Corio are very much engaged in that discussion and are hopefully helping to spearhead a solution for the industry that will mean that we'll start to see frameworks promulgated and opportunities for developers to start to secure site control very, very soon. And the future is very bright, I think, for the offshore wind industry in Brazil. Not only is that regulation coming forward and other regulators and politicians alike engaged in discussions on how that regulation should be finalised, but there's a very positive set of physical characteristics associated with the geography that should allow Brazil to deliver some of the highest capacity projects in the world. So it's incredibly exciting to be part of the industry at this stage. stage and to be able to hopefully witness a really big expansion of the industry over the coming years. In addition to the regulation that's under discussion, though, I do think there are a few things that the regulators and policymakers could helpfully consider. At the moment, I think there's over 200 gigawatts of offshore wind farm projects that have registered themselves with the Environmental Authority, IBAMA, and that's a flooded market. At the moment, that there's no gap in the electricity generation market for 200 gigawatts of projects. So it's incredibly important, as I mentioned earlier in the discussion, that Brazil starts to consider the role that offshore wind can play in the energy mix and maybe set out some sort of targets for offshore wind, how they expect offshore wind to contribute to the existing energy mix over coming years in both a short-term and a long-term capacity. I think we're aware from information that's already been published by EPE that we're expecting by 2030 a 15 gigawatt shortfall of electricity from existing hydro plants. Perhaps there's capacity available through that shortfall that could allow offshore wind to enter the market, or maybe there's an opportunity to reallocate some of the capacity that is currently attributed to gas and thermal power projects. I don't know the answer, but I think it's important that there is an answer and that answer comes forward in parallel with the regulation, because it's going to be very important to investors and developers looking to bring forward offshore wind farm projects under that regulation to understand how their projects will achieve a route to market and when that route to market will be available. At the moment, I mentioned there is this there are these two frameworks developing almost in parallel, the Bill of Law and the decree, and actually I think both of those frameworks provide a reasonably similar, they present a reasonably similar set of mechanisms through which site control can be achieved, and it's a little bit unclear yet which of those is going to come first. I think it's really important that the two of those frameworks continue to evolve towards each other, so that the work that's being undertaken by developers, regulators, stakeholders, politicians, it is not wasted. There are a huge number of detailed discussions going on at the moment on the detailed rules and guidance that will underpin the site exclusivity process, and it's really important that we can take that work with us as the regulation evolves, so that as soon as the regulation is ready, whichever one of those frameworks it ends up being, we're ready to move into a space where developers can start applying to take their projects forward. And then I guess finally, as I've mentioned a few times, it would be really beneficial for government to start to think about policies through which the development of third-party infrastructure can come forward. The introduction of offshore wind to the electricity transmission system in Brazil is going to require changes, further expansion of the network, changes to the system characteristics in order to accommodate those projects. And it's really important that the necessary time is taken to understand how that system will need to be designed and built out, and that investment is allowed to ensure that those system changes are built out within the time frame that offshore wind farm projects are looking to come forward. Similarly with ports play a really important role in the construction and operation of offshore wind farm projects, and also can provide a really important leg up to the local supply chain in terms of getting access to offshore wind delivery processes, and that there will need to be a few fairly large investments made in ports that are suitable for construction and operation to ensure that they're in a position to support the offshore wind farm industry. That investment is a local investment, and it also provides the opportunity for local socio-economic benefits in country. So spending the time in advance to figure out how those ports will need to evolve in parallel to the development of the offshore wind industry will also provide some really good benefits to Brazil.
It's not only about energy, right? It goes also to all the chain that is involved in the generation of electricity, right? As you mentioned, not only the supply chain, but as well as the transmission system, as well as the port infrastructure that is associated with the offshore wind project, the social and economic benefits to all the parties and stakeholders involved, right? So it goes much beyond than just production of energy, right? But I think now we are reaching the end of our podcast. I would like to thank you again for the opportunity and for the generosity of sharing, your views and all this big knowledge and know-how that you have about the offshore wind market worldwide. And we look forward, we wish you a lot of success. We wish Corio that, many projects come to a reality, right? And you have a great success in this business, more success than you already have. So thank you again. And we look forward to meeting you in other opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. No, thank you. I say the same here. Thanks a lot, Sharn. It was a real pleasure.
A pleasure for me too. Thank you very much for having me.